Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. And I have to say that when I heard about this conference and where it was taking place, my brain was filled with a whole muddle of things. Colonel Prinsloo, Zonderwater, Kmdt, and the list goes on, my love for Lake Banniger. So let me try not to be as jumbled in this presentation as my mind was when I first saw the program. Lake Banniger is about 6 or 7 kilometers outside of Lothair and was owned by Colonel Prinsloo. Colonel Prinsloo was the son of Commandant Prinsloo of Speenkop fame. And he also became the commanding officer of Zonderwater prisoner of war camp. My father served as one of his welfare officers. And that is how this association began. Lake Banniger became my fantasy land, my Narnia. It wasn't entered through a cupboard in an upstairs room, but after about 4 hours of rattling around in a huge Chevrolet, 1952 Chevrolet Deluxe. And as I drove onto the farm, I would see on my right the cemetery, the obligatory farmers who died in the flu epidemic in 1918. 2 Boer War soldiers who I believe names are inscribed on the Bergendal monument, later exhumed, and that became a major fight between the colonel, who was a SUP, and the National Party. I also recently have had the opportunity to present to OHASA, the Oral History Association of South Africa, and the Oral History Association from Mpumalanga. These focus principally on the histories of black South Africans. And knowing I was going to do the speech, I engaged in a conversation with someone who comes from Gauteng, an isiZulu speaker, but multilingual, as most indigenous language speakers from that area are. And he was stunned that the Boer War created such a degree of animosity between English and Afrikaans speakers. My father-in-law was Afrikaans, Langenvelder. He married an English girl. His family disowned him for 20 years. They would not speak to him. And those of you of my age may remember that there was serious strain between English-speaking and Afrikaans-speaking South Africans as a result of that awful war. And then that later developed into the Boeretwis, Sappa and Natta, which also started going through my head, and the reasons for that will become apparent soon. Macorkindale, in fact, when I saw Duncan and I saw his presentation on the program, I asked him, was he going to cover Macorkindale? Macorkindale was a Scot, I won't go into much detail on this, of rather dubious intent, let's put it that way, who received permission from the Transvaal Republic president to open up the Eastern Transvaal as it was. Lake Chrissy he named, Lake Banniger he named, Lothair, Lochiel, that whole area is called New Scotland as a result of that association. The story revolves around this 9-year-old boy, so arriving in my fantasy land and looking at the horses and asking the colonel if I could ride a horse. No saddle, and I was asking for a saddle. Klim op en ry, seun, klim op en ry. And that was my experience. When it came time to build a cottage for Boet Prinsloo, the colonel's son, as a 9-year-old kid, you were sent out with a .22 revolver to go and shoot some guinea fowl to prepare the toiletry arrangements. So I grew up as a kind of Soti boer. It was an odd situation. On one occasion, when Chris Darwell, after whom I believe the little village near Ermelo is named, and who served under Commandant Prinsloo of Speenkop fame, came to the farm to meet the son of his old commander. He was sitting on the stoop, wonderful, beautiful house, 2-sided stoop, built by Italian prisoners, by the way, as was the Catholic Church in Middelburg. And I stepped out, and when Chris Darwell looked at me and said, "Julle mense het my maar doodgemaak." Toe sê ek, "Hoe sê oom nou?" And that was my introduction to the concentration camps. and it is a memory that has remained with me all my life, and it's one I think I will die with. Let's go back to this colonel. Wonderful man, tough as nails, short, broad. I'm sure you all know that, well, you may not all know, but he served in German West Africa as a captain. He was commandant of the, I think, Regiment Botha, was about to go up north when he was called by Jan Smuts to say, please, we want you to take over Zonderwater prisoner of war camp. And apparently Colonel Prinsloo's response went something like this: Ja, Obas, maar ek gaan nie beveel het hier. They became remarkable friends, and in fact, Colonel Prinsloo stood against one John Forster in this very area and was beaten up by Nationalist Party supporters. He kept the broken glasses on his desk for all the years that I can remember. What I'd quite like to do now is just to read a speech that he made. I make no excuse for using material from the War Museum magazine. In 1966, my father became its first editor. And I would like now to read what was published. I just hope I'm going to be able to read it and talk into the microphone at the same time. It says here that it starts like this: when I say thank you for this fine reception, I want to assure you that it springs from a source deeper than than an ordinary human touch. The honor and the pleasure is entirely mine. I should say that he was addressing the battalion, the Middlesex Battalion's officers at their annual dinner, following a visit to Geneva, where he took part in a conference to relocate prisoners across the globe. I am indeed proud to be amongst you as members of so famous a regiment, but more so because you belong to the London people, so few of whom not so long ago had to stand so many alone at bay between victory and defeat of perhaps our Western civilization. May I assure you of the highest admiration of my people in South Africa for you, who preferred a grave under the ruins of debris, under the ruins and debris of your fine houses, rather than bend your knees to the brutal bullies and cruel gangsters of time. Men of your regiment, Lieutenant Colonels Cuddigan, Hermelin, and others served under my command during this last war, and I'm glad to say they were not the worst I commanded. In the First World War, I also had the honor of having some of your regiment's members under me. Talking of that war, it seems almost strange to think that it took place only 12 years after the Boer War, in which I took up a rifle against you as a boy of 11. He was subsequently captured by the British, and because of his age, interned the concentration camp at Barberton with his mother. Today, I cannot help thinking, and this is the most wonderful paragraph, I think, in the speech. Today, I cannot help thinking of our Boer War generals, Koen Brits, who at the outbreak of the war in 1914 and the rebellion in our country received a wire from General Louis Botha asking him how many volunteers he could raise by the following Saturday. And he replied saying, I can raise 70,000 by Saturday, but let me know who the hell I must fight this time. Just remarkable. I first heard your regiment's name from my late father, Commandant Prinsloo, who commanded the burghers on Speenkop, January 24, 1900, when he said to my late mother, the Middlesex and Lancaster Fusiliers were plucky fellows, and it seemed a pity that we, belonging to two God-fearing nations, should kill one another like that. On Speenkop there stands a monument erected on the trenches, which had to serve as an honourable grave to those brave men of yours. If I remember well, special mention was made of your Middlesex men, the late Captain Muriel, a man among men. In that war, I lost my all. My heart was full of bitterness and revenge. I was very sorry we could not kill you all. And looking back, I often wonder What would have happened to me were it not for men like General Botha and Smuts to lead us? It was well expressed by that grand old soldier, General H. Sir Smith Dorrien, when he said, "We had a good scrap because chivalry was alive then." Anyway, we made an honourable peace, joined hands, coming to grips with reality on the ruins of our wars, realising that not only on the foundations of good fellowship through the mutual respect for one another's sentiments was it possible to form our British Commonwealth of Nations within the broad framework of which we have learned to cooperate, to think and feel alike, and to act and sacrifice for the common good, which, in view of the present world conditions, is indeed a fine example for suffering humanity struggling in their ruins towards peace with security to follow. It demands, however, a much larger framework, an entirely new world system, needing atomic courage, because unless we are prepared to look far beyond even the glory of the Middlesex Regiment and of the British Commonwealth of Nations, and make way for a new life of unselfish cooperation in a system of sympathy and sacrifice for humanity as a whole, mankind will fall again. And we have we not? In closing, just a little anecdote. In 1965, the Zonderwater Block Association planned their 20th anniversary of the end of the war. And they invited one John Forster as the guest of honor. My father went down to the farm with me in tow, I not knowing at the time anything about this, to persuade the colonel to attend the celebration. And my father, many years later, said to me it was the only time he heard the colonel swear in all his life. He said, "John, as hy daar is, gaan ek nie 'n fees daar wees nie." To cut a long story short, my father stood in for the colonel, and when John Forster stood up, he started his speech by saying, "I can sympathize with you Italian prisoners here tonight. You know, I too was a kind of prisoner of war. I was interned in Koffiefontein." And apparently he looked directly at my father and said, "And I think there are some of you here tonight who think I should still be there." And that sums it up. I just, want to say that in the discussion I had with this person about the Boer War, it is a history of all South Africans, black and white. What many black South Africans don't realize is that 11,000 black South Africans died in concentration camps during that war. That's the estimate. That does not include voor- and agterryers that may have been caught up in the conflict. And I think that those people deserve to be remembered, just as anybody else in that liberation struggle. We should not lose sight of their suffering. We need to work towards having a common understanding of our histories, and I use plural. There is so little that we know about one another's histories. I thank you.